The artistic movements of Mannerism and the Baroque began in Italy and spread through Europe. The art produced during these movements reflected the tension of religious upheaval and the spirituality of religious revival. The artistic Renaissance came to an end when a new movement called Mannerism emerged in Italy in the 1520s and 1530s. The Reformation's revival of religious values brought much political turmoil. Especially in Italy, the worldly enthusiasm of the Renaissance declined as people grew more anxious and uncertain and wished for spiritual experience. Mannerism in art reflected this new environment by deliberately breaking down the high Renaissance principles of balance, harmony, and moderation. The rules of proportion were deliberately ignored as elongated figures were used to show suffering, heightened emotions, and religious ecstasy. Mannerism spread from Italy to other parts of Europe and perhaps reached its high point in the work of El Greco, the Greek. El Greco studied the elements of Renaissance painting in Venice. He also wrote many works on painting. From Venice, El Greco moved to Rome. His career as a painter, though, stalled there, possibly because he had criticized Michelangelo's artistic abilities. But when he moved to Spain, El Greco met with great success. In El Greco's paintings, the figures are elongated or contorted, and he sometimes used unusual shades of yellow and green against an eerie background of stormy grays. The mood of his works reflects well the tensions created by the religious upheavals of the Reformation. Mannerism eventually was replaced by a new movement, the Baroque. Now, this movement began in Italy at the end of the 16th century and eventually spread to the rest of Europe and Latin America. It was eagerly adapted by the Catholic Reform movement as shown in the richly detailed buildings at Catholic courts, especially those of the Habsburgs in Madrid, Prague, Vienna, and Brussels. Baroque artists tried to bring together the classical ideals of Renaissance art and the spiritual feelings of the 16th century religious revival. In large part, though, Baroque art and architecture reflected a search for power. Baroque churches and palaces were magnificent and richly detailed. Kings and princes wanted others to be in awe of their power. Perhaps the greatest figure of the Baroque period was the Italian architect and sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who completed St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, Rome. St. Peter's Basilica is the church of the popes and a major pilgrimage site. Action, exuberance, and dramatic effects mark the work of Bernini in the interior of St. Peter's. For instance, his Throne of St. Peter is a highly decorated cover for the Pope's medieval wooden throne. It is considered by many to be Bernini's crowning achievement in St. Peter's Basilica. The throne seems to hover in midair, held by the hands of the four great theologians of the early Catholic Church. Above the chair, rays of heavenly light drive a mass of clouds and angels toward the spectator. The Baroque painting style was known for its use of dramatic effects to arouse the emotions, as shown in the work of another important Italian artist of the Baroque period, Caravaggio. Similar to other Baroque painters, Caravaggio used dramatic lighting to heighten emotions, to focus details, and to isolate the figures in his paintings. His work placed an emphasis on everyday experience. He shocked some of his patrons by depicting religious figures as common people in everyday settings, rather than in a traditional, idealized style. Artemisia Gentileschi is less well known than the male artists who dominated the 17th century art world in Italy, but is prominent in her own right. Born in Rome, she studied painting with her father. In 1616, she moved to Florence and began a successful career as a painter. At the age of 23, she became the first woman to be elected to the Florentine Academy of Design. She was known internationally in her day as a portrait painter, but her fame now rests on a series of pictures of Hebrew Bible heroines. The Baroque style of art did not just flourish in Italy. Peter Paul Rubens embodied the Baroque movement in Flanders, which is in the Spanish Netherlands. That's where he worked most of his life. A scholar and a diplomat, as well as an artist, Rubens used his classical education and connections with noble patrons in Italy, Spain, England, France, and Flanders to paint a variety of genres. He is best known for his depictions of the human form in action. These images are lavish and extravagant, much like the court life he experienced during the Baroque period. In the first half of the 18th century, two composers, Johann Sebastian Bach and George Frederick Handel, perfected the Baroque musical style and composed some of the world's most enduring music. Bach, a renowned organist as well as a composer, spent his entire life in Germany. While he was music director at the Church of St. Thomas in Leipzig, he composed his Mass in B minor and other works that gave him the reputation of being one of the greatest composers of all time. Handel was a German who spent much of his career in England. Handel wrote much secular music, but he is probably best known for his religious music. Handel's Messiah has been called a rare work that appeals immediately to everyone and yet is a masterpiece of the highest order.